Back in the 50s and 60s, there was a major Hollywood movie called The Greatest Story Ever Told. It's also in some ways the strangest story ever told, and we talked about that last week. What do these sons of God say about their divinity? Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. They became son of God by virtue of conquering, enslaving, having their soldiers and their enemies sacrificed for their dignity. Would they wash their disciples' feet? Even AI, with how little it knows, says that would never happen. It would violate their dignity. Would they command their disciples to love one another? Now, though thousands followed Jesus and hung on his every word, he wouldn't arm them or wield them as an army in the way everyone expected a Messiah to do. He, in fact, tells his traitor, as we saw last week, Judas, to go and do so quickly. Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar, especially because Julius Caesar was betrayed, even by a close friend, Julius Caesar would have grabbed him and imprisoned him. Might have been sorry to lose a friend, but they, of course, would execute a traitor quickly and never allow the traitor to follow through with their plans. Last week, we left Jesus in the upper room with his disciples at the Last Supper. And if you want to read the whole story, chapters 13 through 17 in the Gospel of John are filled with many famous verses. I am the branch, I am the vine, you are the branches. And the pastoral prayer, Jesus prays for his disciples, and he prays for disciples that are to come. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. And again, you can feel the treachery. An insider. He knows just where to bring the troops. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And there's a lot of debate. Is this shock, astonishment, an element of divine power? It's really unsure. Some of you who have been to church for a very long time will say, well, there's certain elements of this story that seem to be missing. Where's the kiss? You'll find that in the synoptics. There's always a debate about how the Gospel of John relates to the other stories. And as we walk through the story today, you'll notice again, some elements aren't there. And some elements are unique to John. I tend to believe that these Gospels were quite early. And while we know there's some dependency between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John seems to be, I would imagine, from direct memory. And this is how he imagines, because when we tell stories and when we remember stories, we always have to remember details, but some details we leave out. It's just the matter of telling a story. In order to get there within an amount of time, you select what you remember to be important. And I would imagine this is the recollection of John. So Jesus is there. It's exactly who they're looking for. Jesus is nonplussed. Who are you looking for? I am he. They fall to the ground. But Jesus doesn't say, aha, and scooch away, or doesn't say to his disciples, quick, grab them while they're on the ground. Nothing like that. Again, he asked them, "Who do you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus said, "I told you that I am he." Now, some people, that I am, remember the burning bush, I am who I am. Some people see an element of divinity in this. "If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." So Jesus quite here believes, take me, not my friends, right at the back. Now, last week we compared Jesus to Caesar and Alexander, people considered to be sons of the gods in the ancient world, people whose name I can say today and you all probably recognize. Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, men of renown, men who established vast empires, men who have been glorified throughout the ages, and we compared them to Jesus. Today, we're going to draw it in a lot closer. We're going to look at Jesus, Peter, and Judas. So I asked one of these AI engines to sort of whip up Peter and Judas. Now, they look a little better looking than average, I thought, but I thought I'm not going to tinker with that. But that sent me down a rabbit trail about how old were Jesus' disciples? And we don't know. But a lot of the speculation is that often the master would be older, and Jesus was a fairly young man, just 30, 33. And so Peter was the oldest of them. Might have been younger than Jesus, maybe a little older, but not that old. And so Peter there has a fishing boat behind him. And then AI came up with this Judas. And I actually was quite happy because usually AI draws images from like public domain paintings. But this Judas was young and good looking. And I thought, that's probably appropriate. Because for us too, Judas has such negative connotations. But in Jesus' band, Peter is sort of the president of the board, and Judas is the treasurer. And so I want us today, as we look at this story, to think about Peter and Judas and Jesus. Now, ever since these things have happened, people have wondered, why did Judas do it? The Gospels themselves talk about his greed, that he was the treasurer, and actually as I was preparing for this sermon, I was thinking about that strange parable in Luke 16, right after the more famous parable of the prodigal son, the parable of the dishonest steward. And I wonder if there's any Judas in that parable. I don't know. I just thought of that in there because what the Gospels say is that Judas kept the money and every now and then would help himself. Was Judas trying to get on the ground floor of a bigger movement? Was Judas figuring that Jesus, with this miraculous power, would in fact inhabit a palace and sit on a throne of gold? And if Judas would continue to be his right-hand man in charge of the money, well, there's just a little bit of money in the pouch now. Wait until I manage the treasury of the world. Was that on Judas's mind? Now, the Gospel of John says Satan enters into him. Did Satan enter into him through greed? My favorite theory is also another theory that's out there of disappointment. And it sort of goes with this one because they meet Jesus. They see the miracles. They look at the crowds. And what you have to know is that all of us walk around with maps in our head, giving the expectations we have about what is about to unfold and what should unfold. And one of the things that we know, and I would say definitively, because you can even read it after the crucifixion, after the resurrection, right before the ascension, Jesus is gathering with his disciples, and after everything that has happened, the one question on their lips is, now will you restore the kingdom to Israel? That is what has been on their minds right from the start. When will Israel's God finally vindicate the people of God? I didn't have time to get it on the sermon this morning on the PowerPoint because I was emptying the dishwasher and the rest of the family was asleep. Now I know why. They were all in normal time. I woke up early and was going about my business, not thinking about daylight savings time. And a YouTube channel that I never watched popped on, and the topic of the channel was why defeat for Iran is so significant. And the answer was something that I often talk about, which is common religion. Because throughout the history of the world, the way religions work is victory on the ground tells you what's in the mind of God. If you read the book of Chronicles, the question was, why would the Babylonians come and destroy? Why would God let the Babylonians win and destroy our temple? And the answer was, we have failed God. In the first century, if you'd asked the Pharisees, why is Israel subject to a pagan empire? The answer would be, we are not sufficiently obedient to God. That endures in Islam today. In fact, you can read it all throughout a bunch of the happenings in my lifetime about why is Islam so weak? We should be on top of the world. Well, we are disobeying God. In fact, the whole Iranian revolution in 1979 was supposed to set that straight. And so, in fact, if they lose, for most secular Americans, if your country loses, it's like we lost. But for people strongly within the grip of common religion, they begin to ask themselves, what have we done wrong that we are losing on the world stage? That idea was on the mind of Jesus' disciples. In fact, it was on the mind of Israel for hundreds of years. We have the God of creation telling us we are his chosen people and are on the bottom of the heap. And they're looking for a Messiah who could come and reverse their fortunes, topple the Romans, and take Israel and put Israel in its rightful place as preeminent among the empires of the world. That's what they're looking for. And so when they start with Jesus, they see the miracles, they see the crowds, they hear the teaching, and anticipation grows and grows and grows. In fact, at one point, remember, they're on their way to Jerusalem, and Jesus says, by the way, let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to come to Jerusalem. I'm going to be arrested and crucified and raised from the dead. And the minute he says crucified, they stop hearing because it's too traumatic for them to imagine. And then Peter says, what? I'll never let this happen. And what does Jesus call Peter? Get behind me, Satan. Now, a minute ago, or last week, a minute if you're just reading through the text, last week, Satan enters into Judas. Acts 1. Now will you restore the kingdom to Israel? Jesus was a little easier on them then. And he says, it's not for you to know the times or the dates. And then he says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses. That's Acts 1, but we're not there yet. Why does Judas do this? Imagine now you're Judas, and you see this Jesus, and it's interesting. And you see a crowd, and that's interesting. And you think, just like the mother of James and John, I want to get my boys in on the ground floor. You know, it's sort of like meeting Elon Musk 20 years ago and think, oh, this young man's going somewhere. Get close to him as he becomes a billionaire. you might just have a few $100 million rattling around in your pocket if you're close enough. So Judas hitches his wagon to Jesus. But the closer they get to what they think is going to be the big payoff, they're certainly excited about Palm Sunday. Jesus never follows the script. Jesus, we know how this is supposed to happen. You go to Galilee, you draw the crowd, you get them all excited, you make them think they're the Messiah, and then we come along and say, and you get a sword, and you get a sword, and you get a sword. Let's go get them! That's the way it works, right? We all know this. Why doesn't Jesus know this? So you get to Jerusalem, and Judas figures out, I backed the wrong horse. 30 pieces of silver, cut my losses. Now, it's interesting that this is the last we see of Judas in the Gospel of John. The synoptics will send him to a bitter end, but we're nowhere near done with Peter. Peter had been a disciple of John the Baptist. He had been waiting the imminent reversal of Israel's fortune by the hands of her God. As the chief of the disciples, he often speaks for them. When Jesus announced that there was a traitor in their midst, we saw this last week. Why did Peter pass that off to John? It's very curious. Again and again and again in the Gospels, it's Peter speaking up. Next time you read through, just notice, Peter, 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 Peter. It's probably because, as we saw last week too, there's this little pecking order. So these disciples are like, well, Jesus is a little scary, so let's ask Peter. And then Peter voices it. Peter didn't ask about the traitor. It's very mysterious. John leans over. Who is it? What was in Peter's heart? Has he seen all the reasons that Judas has? He challenged Jesus on the road, and Jesus said something that I'm sure really bothered Peter. Is his confidence shaken? If you remember last week, Simon Peter, Jesus says, I'm leaving you. Simon Peter says, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? Again, John, we have all these questions up and down, all the way back to right at the beginning of the book, these two-sided questions. Here's one again. Why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you, Peter declares. Jesus answered, will you really, Peter? Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Back to the garden. The soldiers fall down. Get up. Jesus says, I'm standing right in front of you. Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. He's a fisherman, not a soldier. Give him a break. The servant's name was Malchus. And again, in the synoptics, Jesus heals. It's not in John. It's interesting. But his name is, which is really interesting. Richard Bauckham wrote a really interesting book about names in the Gospels. If you want a big, thick theological tome, it's a very interesting study. But it's so interesting because Peter says, I'll lay down my life for you. But what is Peter? Whose life is Peter willing to lay down? Peter's not laying down his own life here. Peter's got a sword. A sword isn't for laying down your own life. A sword is for laying down the other guy's life. That's how wars work. That's how Julius worked. That's how Alexander worked. And everybody wants Jesus to work that way, including Peter. So he pulls a sword. Peter, will you really lay down your life for me? Or will you lay down someone else's life? For me, and maybe also for you. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink of the cup the Father has given me?" And again, it's strange because Jesus knows what's coming and he's heading for it. And again, he looks at Peter and says, "This is like on the road, Peter, when I called you Satan, remember? When you said you'd lay down your life for me, and I said, no, you won't." And now, Peter, again, you have no clue about anything that's happening here. Jesus clearly does. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus, and they bound him. And they brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for his people. Now, there's some detail that I want to give us here that's a little confusing but it wouldn't have been confusing to the people of the time. Because in a world like that, everyone understood that the guy in charge isn't always the guy in charge. So as we go through this, Annas is the guy in charge, the real guy in charge. Caiaphas is his son-in-law. An interesting question is, why isn't Peter arrested? Peter drew a sword. It's pretty amazing that they didn't just grab him too, but they didn't. Again, the prophecy, "I have not lost one of those you gave me." So let's also give Simon Peter some credit here, because what's interesting is that Judas has sort of evaporated in the Gospel of John. We don't hear from him again. Simon Peter and another disciple, possibly John, were following Jesus, probably in the dark, because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. John, likely the youngest disciple, he's at the cross. It could be that just because of his youth, he wasn't seen as a threat. Could also be that he had some familial relations or some contacts within Annas' family. We don't really know, but for some reason, John sort of sneaks along and sneaks in. But Peter, the other disciple who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. Now, right away you have to ask, what's going on here? This is strange. Okay, we get the trap getting Jesus at night in the garden, and Judas knew just where to look because that's where they always went to pray and to hang out and probably to sleep, whatever. But they're taking him at night, and they're taking him to a place. Now, anybody who's ever watched stuff from the Civil Rights era, stuff from Dirty Wars in Latin America, stuff from almost any kind of regime you don't want to deal with, you're taking people at night to an undisclosed location, and everybody's going to be there for the meeting. This is bad. "Aren't you one of the man's disciples too?" the woman asked. He replied, "I am not." It was cold. Remember the Gospel of John? We're always learning what time of day it is. Now we're learning also the weather. And it's interesting. We have a cold, dark night. Judas has just sort of evaporated into it, and Peter is sort of maybe in, maybe out. He's full of himself. He's full of bluster. He thinks, but he's going to skulk. And he denies, "No, it was cold, and the servants and the officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm." Peter also was standing there warming himself. So you can just imagine, trying not to be seen, but he's got to know. He's got to know. Meanwhile, the high priest, and this is where it gets confusing, because in a minute you'll discover this is not Caiaphas, this is Annas. So they take Jesus at night. Where, to whom, who really is running this show? Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teachings. Well, why would you ask questions like that? Well, there's a conspiracy afoot. This is dangerous. So who are you and who's with you? So again, let's give Peter some credit. This is dangerous for Peter too. He's trying to be a good disciple. He's trying to follow, but a little lie here and there. I would die for you. No, Peter. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews came together. I said nothing in secret. So in other words, I've been out every day, broad daylight, plain as day in the temple, all week long. You haven't laid a hand on me. Now at night, you grab me, bring me to a secret location. Tell me what justice looks like. Does it look like putting a hood over someone, stealing them away, doing all this stuff? Jesus is basically saying, aren't you showing us all what you're really about here? Why question me? Ask those who heard me. You want to know what I think? I've been telling you all week. Now I have to tell you again? I'm not playing your game. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of his officials slapped him in the face. Is this the way you address the high priest? Oh, I'm sorry. Does the high priest take prisoners at night to undisclosed locations and work them over to try and get some dirt so that we can have all of the questions and answers lined up when we have the show trial out in the broad daylight? That's what's happening here. And you see this played out in world history again and again and again. And Jesus is basically saying, this is the evil of darkness. And if you operate under these rules, you tell the world who you are. Jesus said, if I said something wrong, testify as to what I said is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you slap someone who tells the truth? What does that mean about your relationship with the truth? Jesus is so subtly here and with so much nuance condemning them for what is obvious. What does it say in John 1? Why do we love the darkness? Because we are evil. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now, the real power in Jerusalem arrests Jesus at night. The purpose is an interrogation to find incriminating evidence for the daytime show trial before the Romans to secure the execution. Who's conducting this? Annas. Annas is the high priest from 7 to 15, where the Romans took him out because the Romans wanted to emphasize to them, we're in charge here, so we will say who's high priest. So Annas was high priest, and they took him out. Valerius Gratus took him out in 15. And so what did they do? Well, my son-in-law Caiaphas can be high priest. In fact, he was such an adroit politician that, let's see where we have that. 5 of his sons were high priests. But when they're high priests, guess what everybody knew? Yeah, I'm talking to Caiaphas. But if I really want to have the deal, right? I mean, Sacramento's a political city. You know how this works, right? You're talking to the person behind the desk, but it's like, no, I really got to talk to this one over there. That's Annas. He's over there. He belonged to the Sadducean aristocracy, and like others of that class, he seemed to have been arrogant, astute, ambitious, and enormously wealthy. He and his families were proverbial for their rapacity and greed. The chief source of their wealth was, can you guess it? The money changers' temple the animal sales, the exchange of coins. What did Jesus do? Drive out the animals, overturn the tables. Annas is like, oh, Jesus, you've messed with the wrong man. So he grabs Jesus at night. He's going to get him killed. Nobody touches Annas' money. Isn't this the way the world works? It's all right here. And Judas is probably thinking, I'd love to be Annas someday. Now we get the reveal. When Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, not the real power, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. So they asked him, aren't you one of his disciples too? He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Hey, it was you that struck my cousin with the sword. Glad you're a fisherman and not a soldier. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. We'll talk more about Peter. Judas goes into the night, uses his insider information, and delivers Jesus to Annas and disappears into the night. His use to Satan was accomplished. The other Gospels will talk of his bitter end. Peter is full of bluster. He strikes with a sword. He follows to Jesus' interrogation. He lingers by the fire in the night. He is warned about his betrayal by Jesus, and nature confirms it. Peter's failure is predictable and reliable. He's going to fail. How reliable are Jesus' followers? One might be in it for the grift. All are looking for advancement for their own reasons. Judas disappears into the night. Peter puts on a big show, hangs around on the edges, can't hear the warnings of the cock crowing. He doesn't. It would be nice to say we're their betters. I doubt it. Most of us haven't been tested by anything like this. Most of us fail far smaller tests and temptations, and we betray him in common, often respectable ways. Jesus walks into this in order to drink the cup his Father had given him. He knows Judas has sold him out, and Jesus does nothing. He rejects Peter's heroics, knowing full well that Peter is willing to shed the blood of others for Jesus, but not give his own life. Not yet. Peter can't heed Jesus' warning. Jesus is betrayed and alone. The one who was a friend to sinners now has no friends who will stand by him. The one who told his disciples to love one another as I have loved you has no one loving him the way he, in that moment, is loving them. He is getting worked over for some confession by the chief power broker who is grifting the temple for money. All the pieces are there. What does faithfulness look like? Neither of them. No one is faithful but Jesus. Whatever faithfulness we muster is a gift from God's Spirit. Whose faithfulness can we rely upon? Our own? Years ago when I started the internet thing, very quickly the question of, well, who do you think is a Christian? Someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. Peter trusts himself more than he trusts Jesus. Judas trusts himself more than he trusts Jesus. A disciple trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. That's what faith looks like. Are we more loyal than those who lived with him day in and day out for 3 years? I doubt it. The only one reliable is him. Let's pray. Lord, I'm sure if there could have been a more objective observer of everything happening in that year, in that place, in that time around the garden, someone would have said, Jesus needs to get better disciples. And Lord, I'm afraid that's still the case. None of us are reliable, Lord. Only you. Help us, Lord, to learn. Peter will learn and be restored. Judas goes off into the darkness. Help us, Lord, to receive your Spirit, to learn from you, and to be your witnesses. Hear our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.